Call the meeting to order. This is the MPOJC Urbanized Area Policy Board, Wednesday, November 16th, 2022, and we're in North Liberty City Hall this afternoon. Chair John Thomas is unable to attend the meeting, so I am filling in as vice chair. You're going to recognize alternates, Kent?
Yeah, I've got Charlie Eastham for Rufina Malone of the Iowa City Community School District, and I've got Eric Sittig for Chris Hoffman of North Liberty, and I believe that is all.
Okay, we're going to consider approval of meeting minutes, July 13th. They were circulated in your packet. Is there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion for approval?
Move to approve.
Move to approve by Rod and
Second.
second by Janice. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move on to setting the next board meeting date. I guess you put tentatively January 25th?
Yep, that would be the last Wednesday of January, and we need as much time as we can to get our budget put together and work with ECOG to get their budget put together as well.
Does that sound good? Okay, thank you. Public discussion of any item not on the agenda. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak? Do you have anything, Ken?
I do. I just have a couple quick things. First and foremost, I wanted to congratulate Janice Weiner on her successful state senate run. By my calendar, it looks like this would be your last board meeting because you're done at the end of the year. So congratulations to you, Janice.
Thank you.
You've been on the board for a couple of years now and have been very helpful, and we appreciate that very much. I've got your certificate here.
And I
Thank you so
I
much.
didn't know you
Yeah.
get a certificate. Thank you so much.
Again, Janice. Okay, we'll go on to administration. And Kent, you're going to, talk about the entities that will nominate for ECOG.
Yeah, sorry, one more thing
I'm
under
sorry.
other discussion. I did want to also introduce our new staff member, Tunazina Alam. So Tunazina started with us August 1st and replaced Frank Waseth when he moved out west. Tunazina is a graduate of the University of Iowa, Urban and Regional Planning Program, and got her master's degree, again, back in 2020. She also has a certificate in transportation planning, so we're happy to have her. She started August 1st.
Awesome.
And she came from Destin, Florida. So I'm guessing she's second guessing her thought about coming to Iowa as of today. But we're happy to have her here. And you all will be working with her soon if you've not already. And that's all I've got.
Nice
Chair.
to meet you. Thank you. So we'll go back to you again with administration.
Yeah, so for item 3A, as many of you may recall, the MPOJC bylaws stipulating how appointments are made to the ECOG Board of Directors, that's the East Central Iowa Council of Governments, was revised and approved back in 2020. And per the revised bylaws, each January, the Johnson County Board of Supervisors now appoints one elected official representative to ECOG and one citizen representative to the ECOG board as well. And then the Urbanized Area Policy Board appoints two elected official representatives in the process that's put into your packet. First, again, the elected official seat and one citizen representative are designated by Johnson County Board of Supervisors, as I mentioned. Second, one elected official seat is filled by the four largest municipalities in Johnson County. In 2022, that representative was from Iowa City. So in 2023, the representative will be designated by the city of Coralville. And then lastly, one elected official seat is filled by the remaining communities. The 2022 representative is from Lone Tree, and the 2023 representative would be designated by the city of Swisher. I intend to contact Johnson County, Coralville, and Swisher and request that they make those designations in the coming weeks, and then I'll bring those back to you all at your next meeting in the end of January for approval. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, we'll go on to the nominating committee for the policy board officers.
Yeah, so agenda item number 3, at your January meeting, you elect a chairperson and vice chairperson for calendar year 2023 for this policy board. The chairperson is, of course, responsible for presiding over all the meetings of the board and is also responsible for signing contracts and so on throughout the year. As director, it's been my practice to discuss major agenda items with the chair prior to the board meeting. And then we, of course, also rely on the vice chair to run meetings when the board chair is not available. What we'd like from the board today is that you please consider appointing a 3-person nominating committee to recommend chair and vice chair for the 2023 calendar year board. And then the nominating committee will then come back to this group at your January meeting with those nominations and report back. The current chair, as you all know, is John Thomas. The current vice chair is Mayor of University Heights, Louise Fromm. And both John and Louise have served for 1 year, and there's a 2-year maximum term for those positions. So they could both be reelected if that's the desire of the board. And with that, I'm just looking for 3 volunteers to sit on that nominating committee. This is done various ways, but I don't think it's real time intensive. I think some folks go to coffee shops, some folks do it by internet or a simple phone call. So, and then ideally the 3 would be from different communities. So happy to take any 3 volunteers that would like to sit on that committee.
I'll volunteer.
I'd volunteer.
Okay.
I'll volunteer.
So Lori, Louise, and Laura. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. And I'll reach out to all 3 of you with some information just about how this works, and then I'll just wait for a report back in January. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you. And then we'll go to the preliminary discussion of the FY24 budget.
Yeah, so agenda item 3C, prior to the preparation of the MPO budget for your consideration in January, it's been my practice to discuss any proposed changes to the MPO scope of services or operations with this board. Administratively, I think most of you know, but administratively, we are organized under the City of Iowa City for our rules, for our staffing, for accounting, and so on and so forth. And I did attach in your packet pages from the current year 23 budget for your reference. Similar to recent years, the focus and purpose of the MPO remains to fulfill requirements necessary for state and federal transportation capital and operating funds, which is probably the most important thing we do. We also produce professional studies to support transportation-related decisions and capital project selection, which we, I think, help all your communities with at some point throughout the year. We coordinate transit planning and transit reporting for federal regulations for Iowa City Transit, Coralville Transit, and University of Iowa CAMBUS, which we've been spending more and more time on, I think, with all of the COVID emergency relief funds and things that those organizations have received. We assist local entities with review of development proposals and associated transportation planning. And then lastly, we also serve as a forum for other regional discussions when needed. Capital expenses for FY24, I think, are expected to be very similar to years past, including a replacement schedule for traffic counting equipment, traffic modeling software, and so forth. I am actually anticipating an approximate 4% decrease in the total MPO budget for next year, primarily due to changes with our staffing and wages and salaries and healthcare benefits. So it should be about a 4% decrease, which will be welcomed, I'm sure. I also anticipate receiving and using about $230,000 worth of Iowa DOT planning funds, as they're called, which we have been doing for a number of years, and also plan on using about $50,000 in carryover funds that we have in our reserves, which we've also done for a few years. What's interesting about the MPO, since all the organizations pay in, it's not a use it or lose it type budget like a lot of communities would be, where if you don't use your budget, it essentially just gets absorbed back into your general fund. For us to do that, we would have to then write checks back out to everybody, since we've already essentially assessed you for your annual payments. So what we do is just put those money in a reserve fund and then just draw some of those back down every year to try and keep MPO assessments down, basically, and use those towards the next budget year. With that, I will bring the full formal budget to you in January for adoption, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, I did put in a couple pages from the FY23 budget for reference. Any questions about MPO operations as far as our budget's concerned?
I don't see any questions. So we'll go on to agenda item number 4. A, public hearing and consideration of an amendment to the FY23-26 MPOJC Transportation Improvement Program, known as TIP, amending project funding amounts for the new transit maintenance bus storage facility in Iowa City. Hi, Hannah.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Hannah, like Louise said, Hannah Neal, one of the Associate Transportation Planners for the MPO. Today, we're asking the board to amend the adopted FY23 to 26 TIP. Just as a reminder, the TIP is the programming document for all surface transportation projects that receive state or federal funds. Iowa City Transit has requested an amendment to the adopted TIP to increase federal funding, decrease local funding, and add in a new funding source for the new transit maintenance bus storage facility. Currently, project funding amounts are $16 million in federal funding, $9,929,955 in local funding, for a total of $25,929,955. And we are asking to have the amended amounts be $19,795,500 in federal funding, $7,204,500 in local funding. Our new funding source is transit infrastructure grant funds, and that would be for $750,000 for a total project of $27,750,000. This new funding source is congressionally designated earmarked funding that is to be used for preliminary design for the new transit maintenance bus storage facility for Iowa City Transit. The TTAC did unanimously recommend the approval of this at their November 8th meeting. If you have any questions, let me know. And we are requesting approval.
Yeah, so this is just a bit of housekeeping, like Hannah had mentioned. So this is for the TIP that you all approved back in this past spring. But as Hannah mentioned, there was an earmark fund that was received by Iowa City, as well as just some adjustments they need to be made. There's no real hurry on this item, except for Iowa City continually writes grant proposals and asks for federal funding for a new facility, which they've been unsuccessful in receiving thus far. But to keep doing that, they want to make sure these numbers are right, and that's why we're asking for the amendment tonight.
Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anyone from the public like to speak? Did you get any correspondence about this?
We did not.
Kent? We haven't? Okay, I close the public hearing. Okay, so any questions for Hannah, or we need consider an amendment to the 23-26 MPOJC TIP. So we need a motion.
Correct.
So I move that we amend the budget as indicated by the.
Okay, motion by Brian, North Liberty. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rod. Discussion. Any discussion?
Yeah, just if I'm correct, this was designated, earmarked in Congress specifically for this, the study for this transit facility. So it's not money that's maybe sitting out there. It really is there for.
As I understand it,
Yeah,
it's
that's the way we understand it.
Right.
preliminary design for the building. Yep.
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next, thank you, Hannah. Next, consider approval of performance measure target setting for the MPO as required by the Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, thanks. So agenda item 4B, back in 2018, this board approved the adoption of system performance and freight targets for 2018 to 2021 as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and we must again consider those same targets and report them to the Federal Highway Administration by April of next year. For each measure, we either need to choose one of the following two options that were outlined in your packet. The first is support the state's four-year targets that were outlined in your packet, or set our own quantifiable target for each one of those measures. And at this time, if you're looking at your packet, it's just the four-year targets that we're actually talking about tonight, which would be the far right of that chart. As part of adopting these performance measures, we're required to state how projects programmed in our annual traffic transportation improvement program show progress towards meeting the adopted safety targets. And we're also required to make that same statement and show the same thing in our long-range plan, which you all have in front of you, a hard copy of, that was adopted this past spring. While MPO targets are not formally evaluated to measure progress towards meeting the adopted targets, the state's targets will be assessed by the Federal Highway Administration annually. And as I've mentioned in previous years, there's no current penalties for not meeting, there's no current penalties or restrictions on how MPO funding can be spent for not meeting the established targets. That may not be the case in the future. Due to the uncertainties in those reporting requirements, the potential future penalties for not meeting the targets, and for current staff time constraints, I would recommend that we again adopt the state's targets. And our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee met last week and also had that same recommendation. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, looking for a motion to approve the use of the state's targets. And in your packet, I also included how the Iowa DOT comes up with these targets, which they consider to be conservative. Any
Okay.
questions on the targets?
So we need a motion.
I would move adoption of the state targets.
Okay, motion by John
I'll
Green.
second.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Second by Mayor. Discussion. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
And I've mentioned this in years past too, but if at any certain time we feel that we do want to have our own targets, we can come up with those targets at any point in time and then just report those back to the state the following year. They have to make sure we've met our certain criteria and we're meeting their goals and so on, but we can do that at any given time. So there's no real harm in adopting the state's targets at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we consider approval of scoring criteria. Emily?
Emily Bothell, Senior Associate Transportation Planner. So every other year, the MPO opens up grant applications for our Surface Transportation Block Grant and our Transportation Alternative Program funding. The grant application for Surface Transportation Block Grant funding will be available early next year. However, Transportation Alternative Program funding may be delayed to pending program changes related to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, along with pending program revisions released by the Federal Highway Administration. So we will update the policy board on the TAP funding timeline when more information is made available to us. It may work that we are able to allocate those funds next year along with the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding, but we will wait for more information. As in previous years, prior to opening the grant application process, we did want to provide the opportunity for the board to review the Surface Transportation Block Grant and Transportation Alternative Program scoring criteria, which was attached to your memo. The scoring criteria were last revised and approved by the policy board in November of 2020, and it was used in the 2021 grant application cycle. In addition, the scoring criteria was also used to score and rank the projects that were included in our last long-range transportation plan, which is at each of your seats. And the criteria correspond to the guiding principles in that long-range transportation plan. Speaking of the plan is available for you all to take with you if you feel as though it would be useful. If you would rather use the online version and want to leave a copy here, we can certainly repurpose that. So up to you. In addition to the STPG and TAP funding, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act authorized the new carbon reduction program to reduce transportation emissions. Funding has been allocated to our MPO for the next 5 years, and we have on average $340,000 per year. The carbon reduction funding can be used on a wide range of activities, as shown in the attachment. We are referring to eligible activities as TAP Plus, so essentially it's a lot of the bike and pedestrian related projects that are currently eligible under TAP, along with a few other activities such as traffic control devices or electric vehicle charging station infrastructure. As part of the program, the Iowa DOT must develop a carbon reduction strategy before we begin allocating those funds. We will update the policy board on the next steps once we receive more information. So though specific program guidance is not yet available, we do anticipate the solicitation and the programming of these funds to be similar to TAP, and thus are recommending we use the same criteria to score projects as we do the TAP. As always, if a community submits a project under any of the programs and it is not compatible with the scoring criteria, that project can be deliberated based on its merits and awarded funding as deemed appropriate. At their November 8th meeting, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the scoring criteria as presented, and today we are asking the policy board to consider the recommendation. One final note, please keep in mind that the scoring criteria is only one tool that the board can use to assess and compare potential grant-funded projects. So you're not required to only use the scoring criteria to award funding. Any questions?
I was just going to mention that I think most of you on the board are used to the two typical funding sources that we have, which is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds, which is the large pool of funding we use for bridges, roads, trails, that sort of thing. The smaller, the second of the two is the smaller one, which is the TAP funding, which is Transportation Alternative Program funding, which we've traditionally used for trails. It can basically be used for anything but roads and bridges. And then now we've got this third funding source, like Emily mentioned, the Carbon Reduction Program. I had just mentioned, before we get into the discussion on the scoring criteria specifically, I'd mentioned to the Transportation Technical Committee last week that I encourage them to get a little bit creative with some of the new projects they might be submitting for. So we'll open that grant process at least for one of the three in January. We might have to wait on the other two, like Emily mentioned. But I had mentioned to them to try and get a little bit creative too in the projects that they submit. One, because we've got a lot more funding than we've ever had before. And two, because I've heard from most all of your engineers at this point too that we've essentially got our trail system built out, and it's impressive and it's amazing, but they're struggling to find new trail projects that we need funding for. And maintenance of trails isn't real glamorous. It's necessary, but not super glamorous. So in addition to that, we've got this new pool of funding that's going to be significant, and it's also available for types of projects. So I'd encourage them just to get creative. So as you're talking to your engineers and that sort of thing, they're aware of that fact as well. And then as Emily mentioned, this is basically just getting ourselves ready for that grant process to start early February, which is the same as it has been every year for the past 15 years or so that I've been here. We do it every other year. And the thing we'll have to deliberate in January, as Emily mentioned, we'll have more information on which of the three programs will be ready to actually solicit projects for at that point in time. And then depending on which ones we are or are not available to actually solicit projects for, we will then have to decide if we want to solicit for projects for those funding sources next year or wait till the following year so we're back on our 2-year cycle. So if TAP funding isn't available this winter, we can either do that the following winter, or we can just stack the funds up and then come back 2 years from now and then have a larger pool of funds. So we can cross that bridge when we get there, but there's just some unknowns at this point in time. And with that, if there's any questions about the scoring criteria itself, that's the goal tonight, is to get through that part. And then the next agenda item actually is related to this as well.
Emily, it's pretty much as it's been, right? There hasn't been any real changes.
There was a revision in November of 2020 under
In
the environment criteria, and we added in some more specific language under 2B, and that was the last change.
Okay.
Just some really minor changes in the last few rounds.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get a motion on the table for the approval of the scoring criteria.
So moved.
Second.
So moved, Laura. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Discussion.
I did have one question with the carbon reduction program, I guess, guidelines not being available yet and using this scoring criteria, understanding it's only one tool. Are we sort of hamstringing or hampering any of that if their priorities are very different than what these scoring criteria provide? Would we come back and amend them just for that program, or?
So we actually have an outline of what will be available. We have the legislation. We just don't know how the state is going to. We have those legislation, but we don't know how the state will actually operate. So we don't know when they'll accept applications and how they'll accept applications.
Okay.
The guidance is actually in the packet. And to answer your question about the scoring criteria, we know TAP projects are eligible under the
Okay.
carbon reduction
Okay.
because they're for anything but roads and bridges.
Gotcha.
So I think the assumption is if you're building trails already or doing wayfinding signage, or you can actually do things like roadside vegetation and other things that we don't typically use it for. All of those are allowed under the carbon reduction program guidance. It's just there's this list of other things then, car charging stations like Emily mentioned, and there's a whole host of other things in the packet. So we have the guidance, but I don't think we've hamstrung ourselves to answer your question specifically because we can change our scoring criteria anytime we want. You know, they're not. It's at the board's purview. We certainly don't want to do it midstream after we've already
Right.
received applications and that sort of thing. But certainly we can change it at any given time. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good question.
Are any of the new funding available for things like to separate bike lanes for flexible bollards or anything? Or is it to look at a different kind of trail?
I think that would be included under the carbon reduction program because that would also be eligible right now under TAP.
Yeah, and anything that's eligible under TAP is also eligible under Surface Transportation Block Grant. So really that it's sort of this nested approach where, and wisely so, the government years ago basically took a set aside, and they used to call it a set aside, where they took a certain amount of the road and bridge funds and said nobody's building trails or doing anything really positive with those funds. So they actually took a set aside and said, now you have to spend these funds in another way. And that's the Transportation Alternative Program funds. Yep. But with the 3 different funding sources at this point, it's a pretty wide range of projects that were eligible, that are going to be eligible under one of the 3. Almost anything road, bridge, or right-of-way related, I think. Roadside vegetation I mentioned. You can do wayfinding signage. All the new things under the carbon reduction program, which are pretty much anything you can think of transportation related that would reduce carbon emissions. So it's pretty wide range. And again, that's why I'd mentioned the engineers and others at the TAC meeting last week to start thinking a little more creatively, because not only are we able to spend those funds more creatively, but we also have more of the funds to begin with. So it's a good thing.
And there's quite a bit of funding available for the next round. We have about $9 million in STBG funding and then 1.2 in TAP. And then we have that 340,000 in CRP funds. So quite a bit
Yeah,
more than we've had in the past.
Yeah, the new transportation legislation really helped out, and the money's really starting to show up.
Where is the state at in developing the strategy?
So I actually will sit on the strategy board committee, whatever they're calling it. We will have a meeting, I think, next month. They were hopeful they'd have it done by the first of the year, but I don't think that's probably going to be the case. And that will, again, that'll push us back because we would have normally opened our grant application cycle February 1st, essentially. So we might miss it. There's still a chance we might make it, but my best guess is it'll probably be spring.
I'm glad to hear that you're a part of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, the subtext of the question is, how much does the state have the ability to, get sideways with the intent of this legislation?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, John, but I think the intent from the DOT is good. I mean, I think and in fact, what we've done thus far is they've actually asked all the MPOs to provide to them things that are in our plans, in our documents, in our scoring criteria that would actually be eligible for these. So they're saying already, how are you already using or being creative with your funding? And then I think the hope is to absorb those and then put them into their strategy. Yeah, so I think their intent is good. Good question.
Any other questions? Charlie?
No, go ahead, Roy.
Oh.
This is more of a comment. And as a person who's been on and off of the MPO for a long time, Louise, you may remember this. This used to be an incredible battle over over what these criteria would be, and the ability to use the criteria as just one point in decision making really changed this whole meeting. I mean, there would be a lot of hard feelings typically after this meeting for quite some time. So this is really nice that we're able to do it this way and not have that. Doesn't mean we won't ever have any hard feelings, but this is a better process than we had for many years.
Yeah, and if I didn't articulate it well earlier, I think Laura asked the question about the scoring criteria too. It's that it's going to be impossible to create a scoring criteria, nearly impossible the way I see it, for something like roadside vegetation, but that also you can score it against vehicle charging stations. It's almost impossible to think that there'd be a scoring criteria that works well for both those things unless we have a scoring criteria that's 100 questions long. And I don't think anybody wants that. So I agree. I think we haven't had to do it too much in the past, Rod, but I think there'll be a point in time when the board will just have to deliberate the merits of different types of projects, which I think is fine. It could lead to some hard feelings down the road, but I think, the board, I think that our
The
board,
process is much improved.
the
over
process
last
is
decade.
improved. Yeah. Our board has always got along pretty well. I think the community as a whole understands the benefit for these dollars for, transportation transcends, but, boundaries of our community. So I think we're in pretty good shape. Yeah.
Well, Rod, I'll try not to engender more hard feelings. So Kent, as you know, the school district has adopted a climate action plan. And my question really is, are the people in the district who are in charge of implementing that plan and the staff on the MPO boards and so forth, are they communicating with each other about this potential source of funding? Because part of that plan is a reduction in vehicles that use gasoline and diesel fuel. So I'm not sure if this is a potential source of additional funding for the districts or not, but if it is, I'm asking if administratively we're in touch with each other.
That's a good question, Charlie. I think administratively, probably more at this level than any, to be honest, because Ruthina, normally sits here, or someone from the school district sits on the board and has for some time. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I don't think the school district is eligible for the funding directly either. I know they've never received any in the past, whether they're eligible or not. But I think there's some coordination just at different levels, whether it's at the MPO level, it's a joint entity level. Clearly, each of the community's planners are speaking with the school district for all kinds of different projects. But I don't know that the MPO specifically does. There is no member from the school district on the technical committee. So that's the committee that we have that meets the week before this board every occasion and basically makes recommendations to the board. So, which is a good question, leads me to say also that I've been asked about our technical advisory committee membership in recent history, and we haven't revisited our membership it's probably been 10 or more years. And that might be a good thing to revisit too, Charlie, is just if there's someone eligible to be on our committee from the school district, a facilities manager, anyone from administration for that matter. So that's probably a good thing for us to be thinking about.
Okay, well, that'd be good if we could follow up.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the board's knowledge too, my plan was to start that process in the spring once we get through our January meeting is always pretty packed. But once we probably get into our March meeting or maybe our May meeting is actually have that discussion with the technical advisory committee and just revisit our staffing. The populations have changed enough for the communities as well. For instance, we've got one North Liberty member, but we've got two from Coralville. I know that, and they're essentially the same size at this point. So I think it's just time to revisit the membership. And I think that's a good idea too, Charlie's, just to have that discussion whether someone from the school district should be there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
Any other questions? Okay, we're going to consider approval of the scoring criteria for the STBG, the TAP, the CRP allocated by MPOJC. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Update on the federal functional class revision process for local roadways. Emily?
Thank you. As stated under the last agenda item, the grant application for surface transportation block grant funding will be available early next year. These funds can only be spent on roadways that are functionally classified as collector or higher on the federal functional classification system. At the November 8th Transportation Technical Advisory Committee meeting, we asked members to review the current map that's available and to provide any needed revisions to us by the end of the month. As a reminder, the functional classification system is a hierarchy of 5 roadways ranging from local to arterial, and it identifies which roads are federal aid routes. To be included on the FFC system, roadways must provide a high level of transportation connectivity. Those roadways that do not have that connectivity or new roadways that are not in a community's capital improvement program will not be approved by the Iowa DOT. Only 35% of the total road mileage within the urban area can be included on this map. And once staff has received all requests, we will work with the DOT to get pre-approval, and then we will bring a recommendation back to the committee and the policy board for final approval. We are not asking the board for any approvals today. This is just for your information. We typically update this map every 2 years in advance of the solicitation to ensure any forthcoming projects are included on the map. Any questions?
Yeah, this is really just more housekeeping, getting us to a point where we're able to get those project solicitations out for our grant funds.
I do have a question. Who determines if a roadway does provide a high level of transportation connectivity? Is that done at the MPO?
No, that is done at the DOT level. So they review all of the submittals, and they provide us with their pre-approval, letting us know whether or not it does provide that connectivity based on like VMT connectivity between other collectors or arterials and information like that.
Is there a guide at all that they have on that?
They do have a general guide. It's not very specific, but they do have guidance that they follow.
And if there's questions on that, do we ask maybe you or go straight
Yeah.
to the DOT for a question?
Yes, you can get in touch with us if there's a roadway that
Okay.
your community
Start with
submits
you?
and it's not, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say work through the MPO, and then we
Go
can
from
work
there.
with the DOT,
Yeah,
and
okay.
we can negotiate.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
And now we'll go to other business. Update from the Johnson County Mobility Coordinator, Kelly Schneider's here.
Yeah, we actually had a meeting maybe a month or so ago, and it had occurred to the two of us that Kelly had not been here to present to the board on basically what it is that she does day to day for, I think, a few years at least. And also, she was the meeting was about some interesting projects she was working on, so we decided it'd be good for Kelly to come and visit with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Kelly Schneider, the Johnson County Mobility Coordinator, and I think about half of you sitting up here have heard from me at some point in this last month. So that could be your cue to leave, but thanks for staying. I appreciate your dedication. So as the Mobility Coordinator, I'm tasked with connecting people with transportation resources. That can look like public transit, volunteer programs, private transit, really anything transportation related that can meet their needs. I am housed in the Johnson County Social Services Department, so with over here with the county folks at the Health and Human Services Building. I started in March 2017, so I'm coming up on my 6th year in position, and I think Kent's right, it was very beginning of my time that I came to talk to the board, so it's great to be back. As I mentioned, I try to be the expert on all things transportation related. I, of course, am the biggest advocate for public transit, as I think it's one of the most affordable ways to get around in our community. Let's see here. I wanted to share a little bit about the funding for my position. So I get 50% funding for my position from the county, Johnson, and then 35% from the city of Iowa City and 15% from city of Coralville. One of the bigger parts of my role is to do travel training. So that's teaching people how to get on the bus and get from point A to point B. There's all kinds of people that are interested in learning how to ride the bus, but maybe they haven't before and they like that extra level of coaching. Some people contact me and they just want to know what technology they can use or when the bus stop next to them and what time. So I can help people with all different kinds of things. I always have that emphasis on education. Sometimes I have groups come to me and they want to have specific criteria, such as learning about transportation technology. So the school district has a transitions group that meets at the Eastdale Plaza. And I took them out on the bus and we had a focus on using transit technology. So we sat in the classroom and talked about the technology, but then went out into the real world to actually apply that. So that was a really great time. I also started a newer initiative working with Kirkwood English language learners. So at the Iowa City location, there's hundreds of students that go there for English language classes, from very beginners on up to maybe more conversational and fluent in English. And I got to work with those folks and do a series with them, teaching them about the public transit resources in our area. And then we also got to ride the bus together, and we went to the downtown interchange in Iowa City and walked over to the Iowa City Library and got a library card. So it was a really nice experience. students. We got to talk again in that classroom setting and update them on different ways to find bus passes and where to find that transportation information. And then we actually got on the bus. So it was a really great time to work with people from all over the world. A little bit of numbers to crunch on. So in FY 2022, I was able to connect with 297 individuals. I also did 20 outreach presentations to 220 people. I wanted to shift gears and talk about the new project that I've been working on, and that's with the National Center for Mobility Management. So this project, sometimes when I have people call me, I don't have a solution for them. So I always keep a list of what I call the barriers or gaps. So where our service is kind of falling short, or part of the town it doesn't reach, or time of the day it's not serving people. And what came up time and time again was employment. And I think if you think about it, doctor's visits may be here and there, but employment is likely 5 days a week or 10 trips a week, right? There and back, if you think of it from that aspect. So the National Center for Mobility Management has a design challenge grant, which is a planning grant. So we pursued that as the county, and we were awarded that grant, and we just finished up the second phase of that grant. So in the first phase, we got our work started last fall, so October 2021, and worked for 6 months trying to figure out how would we solve this solution, right? So we have our task was how might we provide a menu of transportation options to serve employees and employers not served by the current available transportation network. So we saw that there were employers that have hiring needs, and there are people out in our community that want to work. So our goal was to really bridge those two together. And it was really two unique situations. There's parts of town where the bus doesn't quite go that far. Or there's days of the week, times of the day where the bus isn't operating the time that the person needs it to be. So what we really did was looked at 3 different concepts that we thought would meet the needs of our solution or our problem area. And we went out into the community at large. So we were at the food pantries in all the different cities. We went to job fairs, employment searches. We talked to different agencies, and we said, here's 3 different concepts that we think might be effective. One was carpooling. Another was a demand response program. And then the third one was a transportation flex card program. So in that program, we were saying, okay, we're going to allow you funds to choose your own transportation method. So if you want to do private pay, Uber, Lyft, taxis, things like that, it would be at your discretion to do that. So of the 3, what really stood out the most was the demand response service. Mainly because with carpooling, if the carpool driver doesn't show up, then we have an issue, and then you're going to have a carload of people that can't get to work. So that wasn't dependable, and we just decided that wasn't going to be for us. We also saw that there was a big variety in shifts too. Like there was people that would work at one restaurant one day, and the next restaurant the other. They might get cut early because business isn't busy enough to keep them there. So there was just a lot of fluctuation there. With the providing the funds for people to make their own decisions on transportation, what we really found is the landscape for taxis in our areas has greatly changed. So when we were out sitting down with people getting free lunch in Iowa City, they would say, I've ordered a taxi and it never comes. Or taxis aren't running on Sundays anymore, and taxis are doing Medicaid trips and all these different things. And that was the same case with Uber and Lyft, is we just didn't have enough control to know that there was drivers available to take their trip. So no matter how much funds they had, we can't put drivers on the ground with that option. So that's where we decided to do the demand response project. And that's really what our phase 2 of the grant was really all about. So from June, this last summer through the fall, September here, we worked on figuring out how we could design a demand response project to address this need, right? We have employers that said, hey, we're willing to come to this collaboration table. One of them here from North Liberty, Frontier, in their Norway location, they're buying into a transportation solution, but they haven't had an opportunity to do something like that here. So we wanted to kind of replicate that. And we got to work getting an idea of what employers are impacted by transportation gaps and barriers and started having conversations with them. We also started having conversations with NTS Horizons, which is a nonprofit agency up in Cedar Rapids that's serving the city of Cedar Rapids Transit. So Cedar Rapids Transit is done by 6 p.m. or so, and then NTS, a nonprofit agency, starts doing door-to-door trips from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So we thought, hey, we need something like this here. Would you guys be interested in doing some testing with us? So we got to offer some testing for 10 days in September. And during that time, I advertised that free rides to work. So I had all kinds of different people calling me. With the amount of time that we had, NTS was able to provide one driver and one vehicle. So during that 10 days of testing in September, there were 78 different rides that were provided. That happened with 10 different participants. Of those 10, 5 were people with disabilities. 3 of the 10 spoke Spanish. 5 of them came from Iowa City, 2 from Coralville, and 2 from North Liberty. So we saw a good variety there. Again, this project or that limited 10-day testing really confirmed that people have fluctuating schedules, and having that fixed route or van pool may not really be the solution that's going to find our answer here. So also during that time, we found out that people don't always live and work in the same area. So that's probably not a surprise to you. But I do have some data, and I'll probably just send that off to Kent so you guys can look through that. But like I said, there might be one day where somebody's working in Coralville, but they're from Iowa City. So it was a really great experience to confirm what that looked like for us here in our community. Just a bite-sized cost for that. All of this was covered by the National Center for Mobility Management grant. These grants are designed so that you start with the design, you work through that operational component, and then you launch. So on the 23rd next week, we have the opportunity to pursue the pilot funding, but it's looking like we're not there yet. So we're potentially pushing this off until the next grant cycle, which would be the fall of 2023, to consider moving this along. As I mentioned, I'm in the social services department. So myself and Lynette Jacoby have pushed this along absolutely as far as we can. And we're really looking for the next transportation expert, if you will, to continue this project. But we're really looking forward to seeing how that's going to look in our area. We've created a great momentum, and we're excited to see how this goes. So, any questions?
I'll just ask, with that particular project, how closely are you working with like Iowa City Coralville Transit staff so that, you know?
Yes, absolutely. So we've been working very closely with them. They had the opportunity to hear from the very get-go that we were pursuing this. They got to listen into what our 3 concepts were that we tested out and about. And then, of course, we've confirmed that the demand for overnight transportation aligns with the City of Iowa City's transportation goals. As to Kent could speak to, for decades now, the need for an after-hour service has been in the passenger transportation plan. So I was the silly one that said, okay, let's get this party started and figure out how to do this. So the National Center for Mobility Management has been really great to work with. They can speak to community transportation programs all throughout the United States. So they've had a lot of great examples and feedback for us on that. But yes, we have been working very closely, and it would be ideal if one of them, either Iowa City, Coralville, could be the parent moving forward, if you will, of this idea that we've created. So we've definitely been having those conversations. I don't think we're going to have it figured out by the 23rd next week. But we definitely need to keep the momentum going. So perfect question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Kelly, I was trying to catch, so it is a van pool? Or
What's that?
that wasn't so good? A van pool, is that what you're
So
doing?
the phrase that we're using is demand response.
Okay, thank you.
That
Yeah.
means the service comes to the person requesting the ride.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the more unique things that is difficult to compare is we're looking at how can employers get financially involved in our project. So there's some examples, as I mentioned, the Frontier out in Norway. They're matching what their employees are paying in fare. And then I think to get the project started, they helped provided the vehicles initially. Yeah, so there's nothing set in stone, but that we're definitely looking at some of those examples. Yes.
Just on the cost front, was it what you expected?
Yes. So for our testing, NTS is, and we worked with NTS because that was the only provider that was readily available to do a short period of testing. And they are currently at $60 per hour. And let's see here. We also have to pay mileage, and that's where we need to get creative, is because NTS Horizons is in Cedar Rapids, so we paid about almost 2 hours extra just to bring them to our area for 10 days. So let me see here. So our cost per ride ended up being $101.79 per ride, and in terms of transportation, that's not good, right? But one number I did leave out here is while we had 10 participants, I had 18, probably more like 2023 now, that called me and wanted to participate, but we couldn't work them into the schedule because it was one driver and one vehicle. So even though that was back in September, I still have people emailing me and calling me saying, hey, we have this student at Liberty High and they want to start working at this location. Is your project still going? So there's definitely been a lot of interest there. But I think NTS has been really flexible in terms of if that's who is determined or has the best bid for pilot. They're not opposed to being housed here locally. So we're not investing in that 2 hours of travel each day of the service. Yeah.
I would just add too that, the $100 cost per ride isn't sustainable, obviously, but even like Johnson County seats, I think cost per ride is, I'm going to misquote, $20, $30, $40, depending on the year, depending on the place. So
Definitely a moving
and
target
as a
on that.
sample, that doesn't,
Yes, absolutely. This was
that doesn't seem
obviously-
out of the world for a sample. And again, cost per ride, even for demand response like seats, is I think, $20, $30, $40 a ride sometimes. So
Yeah, there's definitely, like the grand total is really kind of a moving target. And some of the difficulties there is determining when we pilot, do we want to have this be, the dream is for this to be a countywide service. It just doesn't make sense for it to only be in one city or two even really. Our data shows that people want to be fluid throughout. So with that, the grand total of how much it would cost to do a service like this is just a moving target based on, we don't know exactly how many people work overnight. And we didn't get to test that. Our testing occurred during the daytime hours. So it'd be nice to know how much demand for ridership is in the evening. And that really hasn't been explored in our area. So when we talk about piloting, we could do something much more smaller scale that just focused on overnight to gather some of that data and figure out how we can make it more long term. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with that. Another component to the final cost of the project is because we don't know the demand, that creates the variation of how many vehicles, how many drivers we're going to have. And that just greatly impacts how much it would cost. But I think that our last conversation, with Darian, with the city of Iowa City Transit. She plans to talk to you guys sometime soon and bring back some more information about this project and then all of the transit vision goals for the transit study from 2019. So that's what I have to share. Thanks for
you,
listening
Kelly.
again.
So before you leave, I'm happy that you mentioned that you've had some contact with the school system and students.
Yes.
All right. And
I think we definitely had a couple riders from there.
okay, well, I'm sure there are more student riders than a couple that won't. Some transportation service that we're not able to provide for them through through the school bus system, right?
Yeah.
So if that can be looked at, developed more, I mean, if you're in contact with Chase Ramey, we're actively looking at our gaps in service now.
Yes, absolutely. People ask who's riding the service. That was kind of a surprise to us. We expected there to be people that are experiencing homelessness or people with disabilities that it's just not on their radar to ever drive or own and operate a vehicle. What kind of was the surprise to us was the youngsters, right? The kiddos or the teenagers that are kind of entering or exploring the workforce for the first time. They want to try a job and they don't necessarily have mom or dad or support system to always drive them there. So that one really stood out to us. We weren't really planning to find that population, but we could see why they were interested. So it was really great. Yes, another thing I need to talk about with this project is myself and NTS, we did all of the scheduling and dispatch manually, and that was really difficult. So I got to dip my toe in for 2 or 10 days, seeing what it's like to have somebody call you and say, oh, I'm staying at my girlfriend's house. My pickup location's actually this address today. So NTS Horizons has started using transit technology with VIA. And I think they're almost at their second year with that. So we would definitely, adding to that final cost of what it would look like to operate this program, technology would definitely be very beneficial for us. There's multiple reasons to do that. Not only can we pull data and reports really quickly and say, this is how many Coralville riders, this is how many North Liberty, but it also allows us to establish different fare rules. So if certain employers want to buy in at this capacity and say, you know what, anybody that starts at McDonald's, they can have 30 days worth of free rides. We can apply that fare rule to that particular customer. And then the next person, for whatever job or employment we've worked out, they could have a different fare rule. So we're very excited to see this come to life. We just got to find the right footing to keep it going.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
We'll go to discuss the Severson Charity Challenge. Hi, Sarah.
I'm Sarah Walls with the MPO. Probably not many people here remember Linda Severson. I know a few of you do, but she was the social service person with the MPO for many years until her death in 2011. And when she passed away, it was a decision of the board at the time to have a charity challenge between the communities where each community chooses a charity to raise money for or take donations for, and then we have a way of comparing those and awarding a trophy every year. And over the years, I think fewer and fewer people remember Linda, and communities are each doing other charity and fundraising things. So our donations have been going down every year. We still do raise funds, but they've diminished considerably. And so we're looking at this year at what we want to do or what you want your communities to do. Like I said, people are giving to charities, and that's maybe a little bit competing. And so we're looking for a way to go forward, whether we want to just continue, because it does still raise funds. We just brought in, I think, a little bit less than $5,000 last year. So we could continue having the competition as we have in the past. We could do away with it altogether. We also looked into another opportunity, doing less of a competition between communities, but the communities working together to raise funds. The last several years, all of the communities have been raising money for their local food pantries. And so we've looked into doing something with GoFundMe. I don't know, Kent, if you want to.
Yeah. So like Sarah says, not to diminish the good that's been done, but like Sarah said, the longer time passes, the fewer of us that knew Linda. We're happy to continue this. I did talk to accounting in Iowa City, and if we want to this year, just to try and spark things a little bit more, we did get permission to use either like a Venmo, a GoFundMe, a PayPal. I'm not exactly sure which one is the best to use yet, but we do have that ability. And then if we move forward with the Severson Challenge, we would probably go that direction. And then we have the ability to basically then just cut checks back out to the food pantries. That's who the communities have typically chosen to be the recipient of the funds. So I was talking to Louise a little bit about this before the meeting. Nobody wants to be the one to say, yeah, we should stop the Linda Severson Challenge, but I think that's okay if that's what the board wishes to do. And also, if we want to keep it alive, that's great too. We're more than happy to try and go down that path of like a GoFundMe. We know everybody else has other charities they donate to. Your communities are all doing a great job. So just wanted to open that up for discussion. We're happy to do whatever the board would like to do. If we don't do it again, that doesn't mean we can't do something else in future years. But we're happy to do what the board wants us to do. I think over the last, what's it been? We started in 2011, I believe. So we've been at this for more than a decade, and we've certainly raised a good amount of funds. But not to say those funds wouldn't be donated to a different cause.
We were
anyway, so.
discussing kind of with COVID, it kind of went down. I mean, I think that was,
It was going down before that, but yeah, I think, yes. And then I think that there are more, I know, for example, in Iowa City, and probably in all the communities, the fundraising for United Way, and then there are various other, we do a peanut butter challenge where we're collecting peanut butter for the food pantries and sponsoring families around the holidays and things like that. And I just think, I know originally so many people knew Linda, and so when we reached out to the communities, there was a contact there that was excited about it for that reason. And I think time marches on, and it's harder to recruit that feeling, I think. So
Well, I do like the option of some kind of GoFundMe because people can just look at a site and do that for the food pantries. Easy. I mean, we could still call it.
yeah, I mean, we can set
not
one of
call
the
it a
things.
challenge,
Yeah,
maybe.
one of the things that Kent and I talked about was like, setting a goal for the
community.
communities to raise together, and then however they want to do that. But they can. One of the ways is to direct money through an online site to collect donations that way.
It would no doubt make it easier for everyone involved.
Could I throw something out? So I am one of the people that knew Linda really well, but I wonder if maybe we should think about what if we did something for a year, tried to raise money, and then basically this went away, but we did something lasting. Like what if we bought a park bench or something, that could have Linda's name on it, that would be more permanent, and because a couple $1,000 you could do something nice somewhere, and then maybe we don't have to worry about this in future years.
I think that's a nice idea. Yeah.
And then anybody who saw the name on something would be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah. I joked with Sarah, but having also known Linda and worked with her for a long time, I think she would laugh at this discussion. She's like, either do it or you don't. It's fine. I don't think she would have taken real issue with it.
She worked for Johnson County for probably 25 years before she worked for the MPO. So I'd be willing to do something to go to some of the people that knew her at the county to try to help spark that a little.
See a lot of head nods. Okay, well let's do something like that then. Unless there's, we have time for more discussion, but that sounds good. We'll go ahead. It sounds like the board's fine with this, or something similar to it. We'll go ahead and get like a GoFundMe or something. I don't know if it'll be PayPal, Venmo, GoFundMe, whatever our accounting group says is the easiest and best to use. We'll contact, like we normally would, all of the city administration or city clerks and get that out to them. We'll do the Severson Challenge. We'll raise as much funds as we can. And then, yeah, we'll come back to the board and we can figure out what we want to do with it. I mean, I think we can do something lasting, like you say, Rod, and then the rest of the donations go to the food pantries, however we want to do it. Good. Sounds fair.
Thank you.
It's a good idea.
Thanks, Rod.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thanks, sir.
And then also, we were going to talk about the Krandic a little bit from,
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't put, so under other business here, I did not put a formal agenda item on for basically continuation of the Krandic Railroad discussion or some other mode on the Krandic line. I just wanted to mention that I have some other discussions with Laura Burgess. I've talked to Jeff Fruin and some other folks since our last MPO meeting. We also had the joint entities meeting, which I think probably most of you were at, if not all of you, back on October 17th. Where we also had a discussion. That discussion got a little bit sideways just because there's a lot of different faces there that haven't been on the MPO boards. I think there's a little bit of confusion about where we're at and where we're going and all these things. All of that said, I did talk to Laura Burgess, I think it was yesterday. I also talked to Jeff Fruin yesterday, I believe it was, city manager of Iowa City. And it sounds like Iowa City is in a position to move forward with further study. I think that's, when I was talking to the city manager, he seemed to think that it was in the strategic plan for Iowa City. Not been adopted yet, but he felt like he was in a good spot to say, hey, I think Iowa City wants to move forward with this. I also talked to Rod Sullivan yesterday. So happy to have a discussion about it, but it sounds to me like with Iowa City wanting to move forward, we will work on a request for proposal to actually get a consultant on board to look at bus rapid transit on the Krandic line. And you'll all remember, we've got our rail study done. So passenger rail studies are done. This would be to basically create a complementary bus rapid transit study, compare the two for advantages and disadvantages, and then implement a project if we wanted to. So that's a whole nother, that's phase 2 of this. But the first phase would be to get somebody on board to do that study. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but we'll have to put together a request for proposal, and we'll have to work with Krandic Railroad on that. And then with all of your approval, I would just work with your city managers to figure out how to basically fund the study. I know the county has some funds set aside, I think some ARPA funds. We just want to make sure that those would work and those are available and figure out how much of those funds you want to use.
so you don't need a vote, you just need a head nod.
Yeah, I don't think so. And that's been the disconnect, I think, the whole time, is that this MPO board doesn't tell individual communities what to do, right? So we have elected officials from all the different groups on this board, but we really can't say, Iowa City, you should do this or you shouldn't do this. And part of the struggle has been, for me, is I really didn't think it was wise to move forward with the study if either Iowa City, Coralville, or North Liberty didn't say, yeah, we're really interested. Because at the end of the day, even if we have a study that says it's positive and you should do this, if none of those communities were on board, then none of those communities will implement the necessary steps to have either bus rapid transit or a passenger rail line in their communities. So happy to talk about it more if we need to, but I think we're to a point where we move forward with the study. And like I say, with your permission, I'll just talk to your city managers and get the funding worked out and the approval for the request for proposal and that sort of thing, because we want to make sure that we're actually studying what it is we want.
And then it'll be an agenda item in January.
For an update, probably. Yeah, just for an update. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time. My best guess is it'll be 3 months to get somebody on board, probably minimum, by the time we get the request put out and find someone, assuming we get anyone that wants to do the project. That's been a problem lately for all kinds of projects in your community. So I would say probably 3 months just to get this thing probably out to folks and get somebody on board, and then probably 9 months to get the study done. That's kind of a typical timeline, give or take.
I would just say in the meantime, I'll keep talking to folks about it. So you'll continue to hear from me, and I'll ask Kent to keep it on the agenda, because not just the study for the bus rapid transit option, but these conversations of regional transportation. I think Kelly, who stepped out, said it best of, transportation transcends boundaries. And so we need to just continue having these conversations. And now currently the mantle being carried by Better Together 2030. So we actually have like an organization with at least one staff person right now, Katie Gerlach, who's saying this has been identified as a priority for the region. And so we really need to keep pushing this forward. I realize that's relatively vague, but just thank you all for indulging me and us in continuing these conversations so that by the time we have something from a study, we can say, okay, that will make sense or won't make sense, and people can get on board quickly.
Yep, agreed. And I believe for those that were at the last joint entities meeting back on October 17th, I think the goal of that meeting was to have discussions with your constituents and come back at the January 9th meeting, which would be the next joint entities meeting. That discussion might be different now. I think that we know we want to move forward, or at least have one community that wants to move forward for sure. I think that's enough to get the ball rolling. So that may change, but I think the idea was to have a discussion at the January 9th joint entities meeting as well. So lots of different venues, and we'll keep it on the agenda for the MPO for sure.
Thank you. Is
Yeah.
there anything else that, before adjournment, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Brian, second by Laura. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.